Hey friends, thanks for joining us again for one of our Equip Forums where we're learning how to enjoy Jesus and live for the joy of others. So hey, when Jesus was asked what's the most important, how do you sum up the law? He answered that there's actually two commandments that if you get those right, everything else flows. Everything else hangs on these two commandments. And they're this, and we know them. One is to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength. And Jesus said that the second is like it, that we would love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And even that great commandment there is Jesus, we're echoing back what Jesus has already said of we are to breathe in and breathe out. That's what it means to be a healthy body of Jesus in this place, is to love God, to breathe in, but to love our neighbor, to breathe out. And so we want to talk about that, the second one, the great commandment to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so I'm going to tell two stories and then give you a couple practical, tangible things to do in light of what Jesus has already told us to do. So the first story is when my wife and I were packing up and selling our house in Johnson City, Tennessee. It's where my wife and I grew up. We went to college in Johnson City. I called it ministry in Johnson City. Served as a pastor there for several years before God called us to move to Denver to plant the Oaks Church. So this is several years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago it's been. And we had lived in this house for a couple years, but lived in this town our whole lives, right? This whole area our whole lives. And I'll never forget that one of the last days that we were in that house before we packed the U-Haul up and left to come here is that it was Easter Sunday, and our church was gathering on Sunday evenings at the time, and just similar to what we're doing now. And we were part of a church plant / campus of our church, and so I found myself for the first time on Easter Sunday morning with nothing to do on Easter Sunday, but to go out in our front yard and throw out Easter eggs and let Bo, who was just like 1 or something at the time, to find some Easter eggs. It was just kind of a bizarre change of pace, right? Easter Sunday morning, it's kind of been go time with my job, but I didn't have to have go time until that evening. And I'll never forget seeing so many of our neighbors out and about that morning, doing whatever that is that they were going to go do, walking, or some of them were doing Easter festivities or hanging out with their friends, or their family were coming over, or whatever it was. And we just saw so many of our neighbors out that morning. And something hit me is that all of the churches that were on literally every corner of the South in East Tennessee that had done their big productions and preached their best sermons and done all the things, and there's nothing against any of those things. We should celebrate on Easter Sunday. But I just realized that my neighbors just do not care about what so many of my brothers and sisters and what I have spent so much of my time focusing on. They just don't care. Here it is, Easter Sunday, like the day that if anybody that's far from Jesus is going to go to church, man, it's going to be Easter Sunday. And our neighbors just did not give a rip. And I just realized, like, not saying we shouldn't gather or we shouldn't, but that we're missing an opportunity here. To not necessarily, what if the question isn't just how do we get all of our neighbors to show up to our things that we do, whether it's awesome church services or events or whatever. But what if we actually go where they are, but to go in humility and as an actual neighbor and as an actual human being, but to go with the commission of Jesus, as Jesus said to us, as the Father had sent him, he is sending us. That is our identity. We are sent. And what if Jesus' command to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, that means a lot of things. There's so many implications of what that means. And this is not the video to unpack all of that theologically or exegetically. But in all the things that it could mean, it does mean, here's one thing, it doesn't mean less than loving our actual literal neighbors. Our actual literal neighbors. And is there an open opportunity for the church to enter in to our actual neighborhoods, to be actual neighbors, but to do so on mission, to do so participating with what God's already doing in the lives that we're already living? What does it mean to be a faithful presence, which is part of our discipleship strategy, in the literal neighborhoods, the streets, and the blocks that he has placed us to live? So the apartment building that you live in, or the high-rise downtown that you live in, or wherever that God's placed you, what does it mean to actually love our actual literal neighbors? Let's start there. Let's start there. So that's the first story. Second story, there's a book that's out. It's been out for several years now. It's called The Art of Neighboring. And I cannot recommend it to you enough. Even theartofneighboring.com has a ton of great resources on there. I challenge you to go check that out. Look into it. But Dave Runyon, which is one of the authors of that book, is from the Denver metro area. He still lives here today. He's becoming a good relationship for me in this city, doing some really beautiful, great work here. But Dave Runyon tells the story in this book that started The Art of Neighboring before it was ever a book. It was first a coalition of churches going, what does it look like to actually try to lead our people to love our actual neighbors? But here's where it started. Here's the convicting thing. So they were meeting almost a decade ago, I think it has been now, maybe even longer, with the mayor of Arvada, so the northwest suburb of our city. And they were asking, like, how can we serve? What are the needs of the city? And how do we, as churches, come alongside you as a government and help meet some of these needs of our city? And there was all kinds of things we talked about in that meeting. But the mayor of Arvada looked at these group of pastors in the room and said, listen, from our vantage point, if Christians would just love their actual neighbors, check on their neighbors, get to know their names, and meet tangible needs, what that would do for the flourishing of this city would just be astronomical. Like, we don't need you to start nonprofits or organizations, all that stuff really yet. What if you just actually loved the people that literally lived around you? And the story goes with Dave and the pastors in that room of like, oh no, like, of course we're doing that. Of course we're loving our neighbors. But they got to thinking about it as they drove home of like, I know the dude that lives across the street, like, I maybe know his first name and I know what he drives and I might know where he works. But we're kind of like that awkward, hey, how's it going? As we're like going in and out of the garage door, like phantom, thing. None of us are out in our front yards ever. And then he started realizing, like, wait, and there's all kinds of people around me, definitely on down the street, that I've never met. I kind of know what they look like. Kind of know maybe they have some crazy kids that running up and down the street on the bikes or whatever, but I don't really know them. And so these pastors were convicted that they were starting all these great programs, doing all these great initiatives in the city. And again, not against those at all. Just like I'm not against gatherings. I'm not against big programs. We're involved in leading a couple of those in our city right now. But what if there's a beauty and a simplicity to all of us as the people of God that are empowered with His Spirit, changed and being changed by His gospel with good news to share and the kingdom of God to embody? To say, what would it look like to actually love our actual neighbors? And to see some really cool things maybe even started out of that. But it probably can't be less than that. What if we just start at step one and do that? So that's a really convicting idea for me. It's been crucial to the Oaks Church since we moved here 2 years ago. Our joke is that our church started when the U-Haul rolled up in our neighborhood. Because so much of the church, it is all the things that it is becoming now that we've got to grow into and get better at and grow in and all that. But one thing that we can do right now that's always been true of what our church has tried to embody and tried to push for is hospitality and actual neighboring. Because we believe that place matters. I even believe that place is sacred. That where God has you is not by accident. It's what Acts says, that when Paul is preaching to seekers in Athens, he says that God has allotted boundaries and dwelling places of mankind. He's placed us there on purpose so that we might feel our way toward God. And in fact, He's not very far from any one of us. That what if part of God's strategy to see His kingdom break in Denver, in part, is through you and through me, and not in the elaborate things that we do, but in us to muster up the gospel courage to walk across the street and to say, friend, I've lived here for however long I've lived here, and I don't know your name. And I want to know your name. And I want to know your kids' names. And I want to know what you do for work. And I want to get to know your dreams and your hopes and your story and what makes you tick and what you're passionate about, what you're afraid of. I want to get to know over time your needs and your vulnerability and to really enter into your life, to invite you around my table, to truly see the kingdom of God come here as it is in heaven. And what if that happens? One relationship, one awkward encounter, one meal, one block party at a time. And so my challenge to you is during this COVID-19 season is to press into that. Some of us do that very well, and we're overwhelmed with relationships with our neighbors. We don't even know how to start. But some of us have never even entered into it. And so here's a couple of things that I would say. Is what would it look like in this season where I think people are open? As I go out and walk the dog, or the kids and I and the family are going for a walk, people are saying hi to me. I don't have to even go out of the way. People are wanting to talk. And what would it look like to say hi, but then to press in, like, hey, do you live around here? And just starting conversations if we're not already doing that. And for those of us who already are doing some of those natural rhythms, what would it look like to take the next step to say, hey, when all this is over, I'd love for you to come in my backyard and maybe even now to do some social distancing, 6 feet apart, bring your own chair, bring something to drink, and we're just gonna sit in the backyard and have a fire or let the kids run around or whatever and just talk for 30 minutes to an hour and get to know each other. What would it look like when all this is over with groups of 10 or less to actually begin to invite some people to block parties in the driveway, to hang out or together, or to say, we're going to go to the park and be together. So what would it look like to take the next step in that? And I would also challenge you, if you're part of the Oaks Church and you have some of those relationships already, what would it look like for you to invite other believers that are either in your neighborhood that you know, or especially a part of the Oaks Church that's in your community, or that you have a friendship with, somebody you're discipling, and to bring them into the relationships you already have, to see some overlap of some of these relationships begin to happen. Not some bait and switch or something weird. If you're watching and you're one of our neighbors, we're not trying to come and just knock you off our hit list, but we really do believe what we believe, and we want to see our neighborhoods flourish. And we believe that means a lot of things holistically, but it also means that we go in the name of Jesus and share his good news. And we do want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know Jesus. But even if you don't want that, we still want your friendship. So that's just a challenge to think through. How does that look like in this season? How could you maybe take some next steps as we're all isolated? People are kind of more open to it. That even if you can't do the big things now, you can already begin to cultivate relationships during these times. And then also, I would just remind you at theoakschurch.net/serve. If you go down a couple blocks, it says serve your vulnerable neighbors. We have a template there of some questions that you can write out on a piece of paper, handwritten. You can print it out. You can even get snazzy and have cards professionally made if you want to be that fancy. But to go door to door, leaving these on mailboxes with social distancing, of course, to get to know if any of your neighbors have needs, if they've lost their job, if they need somebody to talk to or pray with, or if they need grocery runs. Maybe you have some elderly folk in your neighborhood or immunocompromised neighbors, to check on people. And even if they're not in an at-risk category and you can't go do grocery shopping, I think people are more needy than they even let on to be. And maybe even a question can open up something that no one's just going to raise their hand to somebody they don't even know or doesn't know very well. And so I would just challenge us to go past whatever we think is normal, to enter into the awkward, and to go the next step. And I think maybe we get doors slammed in our face and we just shake the dust off and move on, and we just keep being faithful. But what I'm beginning to see is that when we really begin to step in, people will receive it. It's a slow game, and we're here for decades with our vision. And I would just challenge you, what does it look like for you to actually love your actual neighbors during this season? Maybe the kingdom will break in ways that would surprise us. Grace and peace to you, church family. Love you a lot.